It all felt so surreal. The world around me seemed to blur as I stepped into a role that was beyond my wildest dreams. The grandeur of the Reich, the imposing architecture, and the sheer magnitude of the war effort were overwhelming. I often found myself lost in thought, trying to grasp the enormity of my new reality. Being chosen to work for the Führer himself was an incredible honor. It was a position that many aspired to, but few attained. The selection process was rigorous and the expectations were high. I felt a mix of pride and trepidation as I took on this monumental responsibility. The weight of history seemed to rest on my shoulders. I was just a young woman from Munich, Traudl Junge, thrust into the heart of the Reich. My life had been relatively ordinary until that point. I had dreams and aspirations like any other young woman, but never did I imagine that I would find myself at the epicenter of one of the most significant events in history. Munich, my hometown, was a city steeped in history and tradition, but it was also a city caught in the throes of war. The year was 1942. The world was engulfed in conflict, and Germany was at the forefront of the war effort. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty. Every day brought new challenges and new developments. It was a time of great upheaval and change, both for the world and for me personally. The war raged on, but inside the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia, life seemed strangely normal. I diligently took dictation, typed his speeches, and witnessed history unfold. The Wolf's Lair was a place of intense activity and constant movement. It was a hub of strategic planning and decision-making. Despite the chaos outside, there was a sense of order and routine within the walls of the headquarters. Little did I know then, the path this job would take me down. It was a journey filled with unexpected twists and turns. I was determined to do my best, to prove myself worthy of the trust that had been placed in me. But as time went on, I began to realize that this was no ordinary job. It was a role that would test my limits and challenge my beliefs. The Führer was a captivating figure. His presence was commanding and his speeches were mesmerizing. He had a way of drawing people in, of making them believe in his vision. I often found myself in awe of his charisma and his ability to inspire loyalty and devotion. But there was also something unsettling about him, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He possessed an aura of authority and charisma that drew people in. His words had a way of resonating with those who heard them. He could be persuasive and convincing, and he had a knack for making people feel like they were part of something greater than themselves. But beneath the surface, there was a darkness that lurked within him. He could be charming and even fatherly at times. There were moments when he seemed almost human, when he would show kindness and compassion. He had a way of making people feel at ease, of putting them at ease with his demeanor. But these moments were fleeting, and they were often overshadowed by his more sinister side. But beneath the surface I sensed a darkness, a simmering rage that terrified those around him. It was a rage that could erupt at any moment, a fury that was always just below the surface. It was a side of him that few people saw, but those who did were forever changed by it. It was a reminder of the power he wielded and the fear he instilled in those around him, a simmering rage that terrified those around him. It was a rage that could be triggered by the slightest provocation, a fury that was both unpredictable and uncontrollable. It was a side of him that was both fascinating and frightening. It was a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos, and the precariousness of the world we lived in. As the war progressed and Germany's fortunes waned, that darkness began to consume him. The strain of the war, the pressure of leadership, and the weight of his own ambitions took their toll. His demeanor changed, and the once charismatic leader became increasingly erratic and volatile. The world around us was crumbling, and the darkness that had always been a part of him began to take over. It was a time of great uncertainty and fear, and I often wondered what the future held for us all. By 1945, the war had come to Germany. The once mighty Third Reich was now a shadow of its former self, its cities reduced to rubble, and its people living in constant fear. The relentless Allied bombings had turned bustling urban centers into ghost towns, and the German soldiers, once confident and proud, now fought a desperate battle for survival. The Red Army was closing in on Berlin, our once proud capital, now a city under siege. The streets that had once echoed with the sounds of parades and celebrations were now filled with the cries of the wounded and the dying. The Soviet forces advanced with a relentless determination, their artillery pounding the city day and night, leaving no corner untouched by the devastation. We relocated to the Führerbunker, a concrete tomb buried deep beneath the Chancellery Gardens. It was a place designed to be a fortress, but it felt more like a prison. The walls were thick, but they could not keep out the sounds of the war raging above. Every explosion, every gunshot, was a reminder of the world we had left behind. Gone were the days of the Wolf's Lair. The once secret headquarters where grand strategies were devised and victories celebrated was now just a memory. The Führer had retreated to his underground bunker, leaving behind the sprawling complex that had once been the nerve center of the Nazi war machine. The air hung heavy with fear and despair. The faces of those around me were etched with worry, their eyes reflecting the hopelessness of our situation. In the dimly lit corridors of the bunker we huddled together, seeking comfort in each other's presence but finding little solace in the knowledge that our world was falling apart. The constant bombardment shook the bunker walls, a constant reminder of our impending doom. Food became scarce. Sleep was a luxury. The nights were filled with the sounds of explosions and the cries of those who had lost everything. We rationed our supplies knowing that each meal could be our last. The once plentiful resources of the Reich were now dwindling, and we were left to survive on scraps. Yet, amidst the chaos, life in the bunker went on. We clung to our routines, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in a world that had gone mad. The military staff continued their work, planning and strategizing even as the walls around us seemed to close in. We found solace in the familiar tasks, the mundane activities that gave us a sense of purpose. We worked tirelessly, clinging to a semblance of normalcy as the world outside crumbled. The sound of typewriters filled the air, a constant reminder that we still had a job to do. We pored over maps, trying to make sense of the chaos and maintain the equipment that kept us connected to the outside world. It was a fragile existence, but it was all we had. The Führer, however, seemed increasingly detached from reality. His once commanding presence had faded, replaced by a man who seemed lost in his own delusions. He held meetings, but his mind was elsewhere, his eyes vacant and unfocused. The weight of the war had taken its toll, and the man who had once inspired a nation now seemed a shadow of his former self. His health deteriorated, his hands trembled, and his once sharp mind clouded with delusion. The stress of the war, the constant pressure had broken him. He was no longer the leader we had followed into battle, but a man on the brink of collapse. The bunker, once a place of refuge, had become a tomb, and we were all trapped inside, waiting for the inevitable end. The bunker became a microcosm of the collapsing Reich. It was a place where the final days of the Third Reich played out in a grim theater of despair and delusion. The walls of the Führerbunker witnessed the unraveling of a regime that once sought to dominate the world. Within these confines, the key figures of the Nazi leadership faced their inevitable downfall, each reacting in their own unique way to the impending doom. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, still clung to fantasies of negotiating peace with the Allies. Despite the overwhelming evidence of the Reich's imminent collapse, Himmler deluded himself into believing that he could broker a deal that would save his own skin. His desperation was palpable as he oscillated between moments of false hope and the stark reality of his situation. The man who orchestrated so much death and destruction now found himself powerless, his grand ambitions reduced to mere fantasies. Hermann Fegelein, Eva Braun's brother-in-law, seemed more interested in parties and women than the looming apocalypse. As the world crumbled around him, Fegelein sought solace in hedonistic pursuits, perhaps as a way to escape the grim reality. His behavior was a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere of the bunker, highlighting the varying ways individuals coped with the end of the Reich. Fegelein's actions were a desperate attempt to cling to a semblance of normalcy in a world that was anything but normal. And then there was Ernst Günther Schenk, the physician struggling to keep the Führer alive with a cocktail of drugs. Schenk's role in the bunker was a testament to the lengths the Nazi leadership went to maintain the illusion of control. As Hitler's health deteriorated, Schenk was tasked with administering a variety of medications in a futile attempt to sustain the Führer's life. His efforts were ultimately in vain, as the physical and mental decline of Hitler mirrored the collapse of the Reich itself. But it was Peter Kranz, the young adjutant, who perhaps best embodied the tragedy of our situation. Kranz was a loyal soldier, utterly devoted to Hitler, yet forced to witness the Führer's descent into madness. His unwavering loyalty was both his strength and his curse, as he grappled with the dissonance between his devotion and the reality of Hitler's deteriorating state. Kranz's story is a poignant reminder of the human cost of blind allegiance, as he watched the man he revered unravel before his eyes. He was a loyal soldier, utterly devoted to Hitler, yet forced to witness the Führer's descent into madness. The once charismatic leader who had inspired millions was now a shadow of his former self, consumed by paranoia and delusion. Kranz's loyalty was tested to its limits as he struggled to reconcile his admiration for Hitler with the stark reality of the Führer's mental decline. The bunker became a crucible of conflicting emotions, as those within its walls grappled with their own beliefs and the harsh truth of their situation. We were all trapped, bound together in this subterranean prison, awaiting our fate. The bunker was a microcosm of the collapsing Reich, a place where the final days of the Nazi regime played out in a grim theater of despair and delusion. Each individual within its walls faced their own personal reckoning, as the reality of their situation became impossible to ignore. The once mighty leaders of the Third Reich were now reduced to mere mortals, grappling with the consequences of their actions as the world outside moved inexorably towards their defeat. In the end, the bunker was not just a physical space, but a symbol of the inevitable collapse of a regime built on lies and brutality. Hitler's grip on reality seemed to slip further with each passing day, becoming more and more tenuous. He issued nonsensical orders, moving phantom armies across maps long since outdated and irrelevant. His generals, once loyal to a fault, grew increasingly frustrated and disillusioned with his erratic behavior. They knew the war was lost, but none dared challenge the Führer's delusions or his authority. His rages became legendary, echoing through the cramped corridors of the bunker, instilling fear. He would rant and rave about betrayal, about the weakness of the German people, and about the Jewish conspiracy he believed was behind it all. We, his staff, became his captive audience, forced to witness the disintegration of a once powerful man now unraveling.